Jey Uso was once at the center of the hottest thing in wrestling, a guy who went from being just another tag team player to the emotional core of the Bloodline saga, the brother who stood up to Roman Reigns, the man who broke away and made people believe he could stand on his own. But now the reality is that very few people actually care about him anymore, and it's not because he doesn't have talent or history behind him, it's because WWE has managed to suck the excitement out of everything he does. You can feel it when he comes out. Sure, the crowd still throws out a few chants, they'll yell yeet and clap along, but it doesn't feel like passion. It feels like going through the motions. People cheer out of habit, not because they're actually invested in what he's doing. That's the first sign of a guy losing connection with the audience. When the reactions are loud but shallow. It's all surface, no substance. And Jey has slipped into that category faster than anyone expected. The problem is that when Jey left the Bloodline, people thought this was his chance to cement himself as a single star. He had a natural story of betrayal, family conflict, and standing up to the biggest act in wrestling. That's real material, the kind of story that could sustain a career-defining run. Instead, it's been nothing but empty feuds, weak promos, and short-lived moments that don't matter 2 weeks later. WWE gave him the Royal Rumble win, but instead of it feeling like a coronation, it felt like a forced move to push a narrative that fans weren't ready to accept. The reaction wasn't joy, it was confusion, because the guy who's supposed to feel like the chosen one doesn't even come across like someone who's ready to carry the company. He can talk about main event Jey Uso all he wants, but if you're truly the main event, the audience should believe it without you having to remind them constantly. Every time he repeats the nickname, it just highlights that he's trying to convince us rather than embodying it. In the ring, he's solid but not spectacular, and that's another reason people have cooled off. When you look at who he's compared to, guys like Gunther, Seth Rollins, Cody Rhodes, or even his cousin Roman, it becomes obvious that he doesn't have the same presence, moveset, or ability to tell a story bell to bell. His matches often drag because there's too much reliance on super kicks, dives, and basic sequences. It's not that he's bad, he's definitely competent, but being competent isn't enough when the company is trying to frame you as a top-level star. Fans expect something different, something that elevates the main event stage. Instead, they see a guy who feels stuck in tag team mode, just stretched out into singles matches. He hasn't adapted, and it shows every time a match starts to lose the crowd halfway through. Wrestling fans are patient when someone is growing, but Jey has been around too long to still be this raw as a solo act. The yeet gimmick is another big reason people stopped taking him seriously. At first it was fun, a little catchphrase that gave fans something to shout along with, but WWE does what it always does. They ran it into the ground. Now every single promo, every single segment, every single interaction revolves around him yelling yeet, like it's supposed to cover up the fact that he doesn't have anything else to say. It's embarrassing to watch a guy who was once part of this gripping, emotional story about family drama reduced to a walking meme. Fans wanted Jey Uso the fighter, Jey Uso the brother torn apart by loyalty and betrayal. What they got instead was Jey Uso the TikTok soundbite, and it's no wonder people tuned out. Catchphrases are supposed to complement a character, not be the whole character, but WWE clearly doesn't know what else to do with him, so they just push this one note until it's unbearable. Then there's the problem of consistency. One week, Jey is presented as the biggest star in the company, headlining shows, getting the spotlight, and positioned as a real threat. The next week, he's losing meaningless matches or standing around while someone else cuts the promos that actually matter. You can't build a star that way, and fans pick up on the lack of direction. If the company doesn't treat him like a big deal every single time, why should the audience? People notice when the booking feels half-hearted, and with Jey, it's been nothing but stop and go. That kills momentum, and once momentum is gone, it's nearly impossible to get it back, especially when there are so many other wrestlers ready to take the spot. Look at how someone like LA Knight caught fire with consistency, or how Gunther built credibility by never being treated like a joke. Jey hasn't had that steady path, and now the cracks are visible. Another issue is his mic work. He's not terrible, but he doesn't have that ability to command attention the way top stars do. His promos often come off repetitive, with the same lines, the same intensity, and no real depth. He screams, he shouts, but it doesn't actually hit emotionally because it feels forced. Compare that to the way Roman delivered quiet, calculated lines that cut deep, or the way Cody can pull on real-life emotion to make you buy in. Jey's promos feel more like noise than message, and that's why people don't talk about them the next day. A top guy needs to create moments with words, not just in-ring, and he hasn't shown he can do that outside of the Bloodline context. Without Roman or Jimmy or Solo or Paul Heyman to bounce off, his weaknesses are exposed. What really hurts is that fans expected this singles run to prove he was more than just one half of the Usos, but all it's done is remind people that he might not actually be cut out to stand on his own. When he was with Jimmy, the dynamic carried the team. Their chemistry, their tag style, their unity made them one of the best tag teams in history, but take that away and suddenly Jey feels incomplete, like a piece of the puzzle is missing. It's ironic because the whole story was about him breaking away and being his own man, but instead of shining alone, he looks weaker without his brother. WWE didn't do him any favors by dragging Jimmy into a half-baked feud either, because that should have been the emotional peak of his solo career, but it was rushed and executed without care. Fans didn't get the catharsis they were waiting for, so the feud fell flat, and once that was over, there was nothing left to invest in. Even the audience reactions that WWE loves to highlight aren't telling the real story. Yes, the chants are loud sometimes, and yes, people still throw their arms up when he does his entrance, but that doesn't mean they're emotionally invested. They'll participate because that's what live crowds do, but online chatter, ticket sales, and merchandise movement tell a different story. The buzz that was once around Jay has fizzled out. He doesn't trend the way he used to, he doesn't drive conversation, and people don't beg to see him in big matches. That's the real measure of whether fans care, and right now, the answer is clear, they don't. Part of this is WWE's fault, but part of it is Jay's own limitations as a performer. Some wrestlers have that extra gear that allows them to transcend weak booking, to grab the crowd by sheer force of charisma and talent. Look at someone like CM Punk, who made himself unignorable even when the company didn't want him to shine. Or look at Daniel Bryan, who forced WWE's hand because the fans cared too much to let him be ignored. Jay hasn't shown that ability. When the booking lets him down, he sinks with it instead of rising above. That's why people have stopped rallying behind him. They don't see him as a fighter against the system. They see him as a product of it, and a bland one at that. The truth is, Jay Uso was always better as part of an ensemble than as the lead. The bloodline made him look like a star because it gave him a backdrop of legends and compelling characters to play off of. Alone, he's exposed, and fans can see the difference. They wanted to believe he was ready for the spotlight, but the reality is that without Roman or Jimmy or even Heyman, his act feels empty. That's why the buzz died. That's why the excitement vanished. People don't see him as the guy anymore, and once that perception sets in, it's almost impossible to shake. The strange thing about Jay Uso's fall off is that it wasn't inevitable. For a brief period, he genuinely felt like the heartbeat of WWE, someone who carried the weight of the bloodline story on his back. Fans invested in him because they saw a man breaking free of a manipulative cousin, a brother torn apart by family loyalty, and a warrior willing to stand alone. That kind of story writes itself into wrestling history if handled correctly. But instead of solidifying him as the man to take Roman's place, or at least as a strong singles contender who can hang at the top, WWE turned his arc into a sideshow act, leaving fans shrugging. His journey should have climaxed in a career-defining victory that cemented him as more than just one of the Usos. Instead, it's become a patchwork of random matches and meaningless slogans that do nothing to justify why people should care. Part of the issue is that his rise was never backed by a believable long-term plan. Wrestling fans can smell when a push is organic and when it's manufactured, and Jay's singles run reeks of the latter. He got moments, but never the foundation that makes those moments matter. It's one thing to win a big match, it's another to follow it up with a consistent stretch that builds credibility. He hasn't been allowed, or maybe hasn't been able, to deliver that. Without continuity, his victories feel hollow, almost like participation trophies rather than stepping stones to greatness. Fans don't want to get behind someone who feels like they're being force-fed, especially when there are other wrestlers busting their asses every week, building legitimacy the hard way. What also can't be ignored is the fact that Jay hasn't developed a unique in-ring identity outside of his tag team roots. Tag specialists often struggle when they transition to singles, but the truly great ones find a way to reinvent themselves. Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, Edge, all of them evolved, creating distinct identities when they broke away from their teams. Jay hasn't done that. His moveset is still basically a stretched out version of his tag team arsenal. He hasn't added new layers, new signature spots, or even adjusted his pacing to make his matches feel like main event material. Audiences pick up on that. They know when someone is coasting on the same formula, and after the initial excitement of seeing him alone wore off, people started realizing they were just watching the same guy without his brother. Look at how the company has positioned him compared to his peers. While Cody Rhodes gets the epic underdog hero treatment and Gunther gets the unbeatable machine aura, Jay gets the guy who yells catchphrases. That's not enough to elevate anyone to the top tier. It's lazy branding, and it insults the audience's intelligence. Fans want substance, not just noise. The longer WWE doubles down on this hollow gimmick, the more people stop caring. They know they're not getting the Jay Uso who fought tooth and nail against Roman Reigns. They're getting a watered down, mass-produced version of him that lacks heart. So when people say no one cares about Jay Uso anymore, it's not just hating for the sake of hating. It's the natural result of a guy being overpushed without being ready, of a company falling back on lazy gimmicks instead of building real depth, and of a performer who hasn't been able to evolve past the tag team roots that defined him. It's harsh, but it's the reality. Fans don't want to chant yeet forever. They want someone they can actually believe in as a top star. And right now, Jay Uso just isn't that guy. He's a reminder of how hype without substance fades, how momentum without follow-through dies, and how easily a career that once felt destined for greatness can turn into something people don't bother to care about anymore.